My name is Sandesh. Quick show of hands, how many of you are practitioners who are kind of actually practice security in their companies? Okay. And how many of you are founders, CEOs, co-founders, etc.? Cool. Good mix. All right. And how many of you are investors? Okay, cool. Cool. Thanks for attending the talk today. Quick introduction. My name is Sandesh. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Seezo. I'll talk a little bit about our company. Before this, I was the head of security at Razorpay. Razorpay is India's largest payment gateway company, kind of the Stripe of India. Before that, I spent close to a decade in application security consulting, working for a company called Cigital, which then became Synopsys. I also write a newsletter called Boring AppSec. Okay, so I'm not going to talk a whole lot about Seezo today. I'm happy to talk about this offline or in the conference itself. But at a very high level, we automate security design reviews. We scale threat modeling using automated security design reviews. This is a problem that's been there forever, which is very hard to scale, very manual in most companies. But thanks to LLMs, we're able to kind of scale these things. And we have many customers who are already doing 100% of all new features now go through a design review. This is really hard to scale. If you've worked in an AppSec team, you'll know that most companies do like 10% of new features go through design reviews, but you can actually automate that and scale that up in your company. Again, like I said, happy to kind of talk more about that offline. Okay, what I really want to talk about is that how application security is changing in general and what opportunity it presents for all of us, right? So I think there are two main ways how it's changing. One, the SDLC itself is changing, and every time the SDLC changes, AppSec must adapt, right? Typically, it takes a long time, like many years to adapt, but hopefully we'll slow down, we'll shorten the cycle this time. The second aspect I want to talk about is that thanks to AI, the scope of what AppSec can do actually expands, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes as well. Okay, so first, the SDLC is starting to change, right? So this is what the current stack looks like if you're kind of building software. You're probably using some kind of Figma or some kind of documentation system to write PRDs. You're using VS Code and Git repos for writing code. You're using Docker, NPM, etc. for building, JUnit for testing, and you're deploying using GitHub Actions, Jenkins, Spinnaker, and so on and so forth, right? And I think there's an impression everywhere that the pipeline, SDLC is completely transformed by AI. That's not entirely true, actually. If you think about it, the design stage, the build stage, the testing stage, the deploy stage, none of this, there's no AI-powered GitHub Actions yet, right? The only place where it's actually changed is in the code stage. And even in that, only the IDE, right? The IDE is definitely transformed thanks to Cursor and Windsurf and others. It started with GitHub Copilot, but now it's transformed as well. And you can already see the impact it has on application security, right? But as all the question marks get filled up, you will have a new SDLC, and we will have an opportunity to kind of build a brand new AppSec platform or rethink AppSec in a way that works for the modern SDLC. This is not a new trend, right? Every time the SDLC has changed, you would have had new generation of application security companies come and win, okay? So when I started in AppSec, I think 15 years ago, HP Fortify and IBM AppScan ruled the roost, right? I get my goosebumps just listening to those names now, right? But when the agile methodology became popular and software development lifecycle shrank, you had sprint cycles, and every 2 weeks you release new code into production. You had to kind of Vera code check marks, Black Duck. These kind of companies kind of really helped scale application security, right? Now you could ask, why wasn't Fortify and AppScan able to scale? That's a good question. The next stage, when CI/CD pipelines became really popular, you had companies like Sneak, which basically said, hey, we're going to scan every PR that gets checked in. And then you had companies like SemGrab, GitHub Advanced Security, etc. Go ahead. So I guess the real question is, when you have an AI-powered SDLC, who's kind of the next big AppSec winner? What is the new threat landscape that's going to show up, and how are we going to solve it? We're already seeing some changes, right? So this is a couple of things that Seezo has built, but we're not alone. There are many other companies who are kind of playing in the same, in the same ballpark. When you need when vibe coding becomes real, when the first time I heard about vibe coding, I thought this is going to be for prototyping, this is for POCing. No one's going to use it seriously. And then the more customers I spoke to, the more I realized that there are developers already doing this in production, right? So if vibe coding becomes a reality, then we'll need to kind of figure out how we, start securing that, right? So we launched a free tool called VibeCheck, which kind of helps you secure your vibe coding experience. We also launched it as an MCP server, clearly becoming a theme of the evening, right? But these are just beginning experiments that we're doing, right? There's a long way to go before the AI-powered SDLC become a reality, and this time there will be a, there'll be an AppSec program which kind of, maps to that changing reality as well. So that's the first big trend, right? The SDLC is going to change, and the AppSec has to adapt, and there are going to be new companies, new products, new open source projects, which will help help serve that change. The second big change that we'll think about, and before I talk about the change, I want to take a step back, right? When you talk about application security, you typically think about people who write code and deploy code. But the reality is that most software is consumed not just by people who build software, but also by people who assemble software, right? So think of a wealth management company which has all its sales data in Salesforce, uses a third-party API for KYC, has a bunch of SaaS software. They actually write little to no code, and even the code they write is probably more like implementation stuff, right? Having said that, they still have software risk, right? So if you think about the landscape today, for software assemblers, application security means different things than for software builders. Right? For software builders, you want to shift left, you want to have a good developer experience, you want to have ASPM to reduce noise, and so on and so forth. And companies like Sneak, Apiro, ChainGuard, etc. kind of serve them. Whereas for software assemblers, you only have companies like AppOmni, Zscaler, etc., which are very point solutions on kind of for specific problem statements. With LLMs, I think this can change, right? I think the traditional AppSec team, AppSec products, which does not serve software assemblers, that can change, and modern AppSec products can do that, right? So there are many activities today in application security which are extremely manual and depend a whole lot on manual tasks like third-party risk assessments, security design reviews, like I mentioned, and so on and so forth. And I think the new age AppSec player has an opportunity to automate a bunch of these and truly provide solutions that will manage software risk and not just small portions of application security risk. So that's at a high level what I wanted to talk about. I saw a few practitioners here, so I had a couple of slides just to talk about if you're thinking about using AI to improve application security internally. Like I mentioned, I was the head of security at a payment gateway company before, so I've built a lot of internal tooling. I work with a lot of people who do that as well. So if I have a couple more minutes, I'll kind of quickly go through this. So yeah, so if you're building AI-powered AppSec tools in-house, there are a few things I see in the market that are working really well, right? So one is that start with use cases where processing unstructured data is important, right? This is a use case where ROI is very easy to establish. So let me give you examples. You have to review some kind of architecture diagrams, cloud architecture diagrams, etc. LLMs are a great use case there. You want to analyze questionnaires, fill out questionnaires, which is all over security, all kinds of risk assessment. The ROI is very, very easy to establish in such use cases. The second tip I would give is do not start with an open source LLM. I know it's tempting, all of us want to start there, but the problem is if something doesn't work with the state-of-the-art model, it probably won't work with an open source model. So start with SOTA, deploy it on your cloud provider. If you're an AWS player, deploy on Cloud on Bedrock. If you're on Azure, deploy OpenAI on Azure OpenAI and start working with that. And then, depending on your use case, maybe in the future you can move to an open source model, but starting with it just, it's like riding a slow car. It doesn't make sense. The third aspect to remember when you're kind of projecting or thinking how long it'll take to build these products, building 0 to 60 in AI tooling is extremely easy. Prototyping is amazing, very, very simple. 60 to 80 is really hard. 80 to 100 is really rare. That's why you see amazing demos of AI products, but they rarely go to production, right? So if you're building internal tooling and you have limited bandwidth, this is actually even more important for you before you spend a lot of time on building the products. Finally, think beyond chatbots. Chatbots are great. They're a fantastic use case. But for most use cases in application security, that's not the natural UI. Right? If you want to run a scan, then expect, the problem with chatbots, by the way, is that you are depending on the user to give all the intelligent prompts, right? So unless they have prompt engineering skills, they can't actually use this well. So think beyond chatbots, if you're building internal tooling. And the final slide, if you're kind of building AI-powered products in AppSec, a few things to think about. One is eval is really, really hard. Eval, for kind of those who may not know, is basically like QA or use cases for AI products, I guess. Unless you're building a chatbot, all the eval tools out there in the world, all the open source eval platforms are basically useless for you, right? So you'll have to build something in-house, which means that this is going to be something that you'll have to factor. And then for most use cases in AppSec, you'll need to focus on explainability and consistency. This is very rare in chatbots. Right? The results are never usually consistent. And then, consider supporting on-prem and SaaS from day one. I think somebody else also asked about on-prem deployments. This is something you can, it's hard to build in later if you don't think about it from day one. Okay, I think that's all I had.